Good evening. I'm News 6 reporter Nadine Yanis here in the News 6 studios and on clickorlando.com. Thank you for joining us for our all-important discussion, Boomtown, a growing challenge. Today, my co-host and I, Katie Johnson, who is the founder and co-director of Boomtown, is here to talk with our community leaders about subjects that are really impacting our community. We want to talk to our community leaders, county commissioners, small business owners, nonprofit organizations, economists, and everyday residents who have been feeling the impact of Florida's growing population, both the challenges and the benefits that go along with it. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce our 8 expert panelists who have joined us today. Thank you guys for being here. We want to start with Jasmine Burney Clark with the Florida Count Census, UCF economics professor Sean Snaith, owner of the Popcorn Junkie in Paramore, Minetta Crozier, Osceola County Commission Vice Chairwoman Cheryl Grieve, who also happens to be a realtor, Orange County Administrator Byron Brooks, Sandy Vidal with the co-president of the League of Women Voters, Orlando's Director of Sustainability Chris Castro, and Ignacio Esteban, the CEO of the Florida Community Loan Trust, who will know a lot about affordable housing. With us today in News 6 Studio B, we also have dozens of residents from across Central Florida who all have been impacted by Florida's growth and who want to take part in this very important discussion, and we'll have questions for our panelists. At home, you too can weigh in. We have News 6's Click Orlando's Bree Voles right now online watching our live chat. So if you have a question about growth, maybe your long commute times or can't find affordable housing, type it up and we'll try to get it over for our expert panelists. We also had questions ourselves. When we heard that 1,500 people were moving to Central Florida each week, we wanted to know, where is this growth coming from? What are our local leaders, both state and at the federal level, are doing to make sure that we are handling this growth responsibly? And how can this growth impact our future? Now, over the last few weeks, ever since we've launched this Boomtown initiative, we have told stories of struggling families, including a single mom who takes 7 hours to get to and from work on public transportation. I rode 3 buses and a Sunrail with her just to get to her $12 an hour job. We also introduced you to a single guy who's now a father of 4 adopted children. He adopted his niece and her siblings, all 5 of them crammed in a 2-bedroom condo that he can barely afford. So with that, we want to begin tonight with our first question. We'll go down the line. All of you guys, we want to hear you answer this. Is Central Florida growing too fast? Jasmine, start.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So that is a great question. I would say that Florida, I don't believe, is growing too fast. I feel like Florida has been one of the states that welcomes residents from across the nation, our snowbirds, as well as individuals from other countries. According to the Election Data Services, also known as EDS, Florida was projected to receive nearly 300,000 new residents within the next year. Instead, however, we've seen due to natural disasters that individuals are moving to the state at a much faster rate, and that number has dropped down to more like a little over 100,000. I think that we have room to grow in the state, but we certainly need to make sure that we're keeping up with the infrastructure to support the residents who are coming into the state.
Perfect. Sean?
Are we growing too fast? Is that the question?
That's the question.
Well, no such thing. But there are growing pains associated with the rapid growth that we have been experiencing here in Central Florida, and these are going to be the most pressing issues facing our region for the foreseeable future. And those two have already been touched on, and they're not unrelated. Our transportation infrastructure here in the region and affordable housing. As I said, these things are interrelated. But we're behind, I think, in both of these areas. So we have some catch up to do. And as more and more people move into the region, that housing problem continues to be more acute. We see single family home inventories falling below three months of inventory, which is just remarkably low. So there's catch up on the housing side, but then we have to move people from where there is affordable housing to where there are jobs. And so that means investment in our infrastructure. I think Orlando has, it's not the little metro that could anymore. It's not fully grown up, but it's gotten big. And so we have to start planning and addressing the growth and the size of our region because it's not likely to stop growing over the next several decades.
All right, Minetta?
Well, for me, I mean, I really think that it's definitely not growing too fast. I'm encouraged by the growth. I think it's great. I think it gives us an opportunity as a city and a community to show what we can do. I'm proud to be, here in Orlando, and I think that, it gives us an opportunity, regardless of what role we play as a business owner, as a community leader, to step up, be a part of events like this, and have feedback on what's working, what's not. And I think that's the perfect way to show the benefits of the growth as well as the challenges. There will be challenges. There's challenges with any growth, but I think that we have to look at other cities and other communities who've experienced it and they've been successful, and let's learn from that and support each other in that growth.
So the fact of the matter is we are growing. And when you talked about the growth coming into Florida in general, Central Florida is receiving a larger percentage than other areas of the state. So that does create quite a challenge. But again, there's also the plus side of it as well. As an elected official, it does fall on us to look at that infrastructure and what we can do to help with affordable housing. And Osceola County, unfortunately, is one that has been behind in those items. So now, as a commission, we have been looking, and we've set previously an urban growth boundary so we can look at how that growth would come into play. We've designed to where developments, when they come in, that we have centers, so we have jobs, because you're absolutely right that jobs and housing goes hand in hand, especially with affordable housing. So we're trying to do those type of things that we can. Unfortunately, a lot of it, comes down to funding. And, many times for counties and cities, they rely a lot on mobility fees or impact fees for transportation, and that doesn't come till after the house is here. So after the impact's here. So it is quite challenging, but we're doing what we can to try to at least play catch up at this point in time.
It's important to know Osceola County right now is one of the fastest growing counties in our region, expected to grow 50% over the next decade or so. And then the second fastest is Orange County. So Byron, to you.
In this case, this is a great problem to have. We'd much rather face the challenges of growth than the challenges of decline.
Amen.
This means that we are a desirable location. We're fortunate. There are folks who want to be here, who want to be in Florida, want to be in Central Florida, and that's a great thing. That means there's opportunity that's still out there, that people want to grow their business. They want to raise a family. Those are all the things that we want and we encourage to happen in our community. We're fortunate as well that when we bring talent, the talent that comes here to attractive locations, it means that we are blessed with a community that's ready to take on those challenges, that's ready to participate in helping us identify solutions, helping us find and bring new creative ideas to the table. We saw that and have seen that time and time again with creations of task force, like the Housing for All task force, or other opportunities for folks to volunteer their time and their talent. That happens in growth communities. That happens when people are invested in their community. And that's what we want, and that's what we want to do, ensure that we are creating this type of community that folks find attractive, want to be here, and then we can come together and find great solutions.
It's always fun to be down the line when everybody's said a lot of things. Orlando's one of those places that's filled with billboards, and unless we're going to put a billboard that says, "Thank you for visiting, now please leave," we're going to continue to have growth. And no, we don't want to do that. But, for me, I live way out in East Orlando and I work in downtown Orlando. The commute just gets longer and longer and longer the more people that we have and the more cars we have on the road. And so I think it's important for us to really continue as a community, and I know we are, to look at solutions for that infrastructure that we're talking about, and also making sure that our schools are adequately funded. We're doing some things in the state that are taking dollars away from the public school system, and that can be challenging for the teachers, the superintendent, and all of the students who are there. And I think it's also important for us to realize that we have a lot of natural resources that as we continue to sprawl, we may continue to take away from our community. And we've got to also watch our water usage, which is really important.
And we got a lot of viewer questions, both with concerns about the environment and our waterways as well. So we'll definitely get to that tonight. Hey, Chris.
Well, and building on that, I think part of our goal here is to create a community where people and nature thrive together. And that's part of the challenge that I think we face in Central Florida with this amount of growth. But I do think it's also an amazing opportunity that we have to figure out a model that could be replicable to cities, not just in the United States, but around the world, to figure out what that balance and harmony looks like between the built and the natural environment. I think what Sandy mentioned is really important. Not only do we have 1,500 people moving here to live, work, and learn every week, we also have 75 million plus visitors coming to Central Florida to play. And you can imagine the strain that might have, the amazing economic benefits that has for this community, but the strain that might have on water resources, on the use of energy, on the production of waste. And in order for us to sustain this long-term economic growth that we're realizing, we really have to come back to this notion of what we call the triple bottom line of sustainability, looking at things that are good for the people, good for our planet, and good for the collective prosperity.
Thank you. Ignacio?
Thanks. So is Orlando growing too fast? I'm not originally from Orlando, but I've been here since the early 80s, and growth has been a reality since I can remember. So growth is part of being in Orlando. And I agree wholeheartedly with the rest of the panel. It is a good thing to have growth, right? From the perspective that my organization, the Florida Community Loan Fund, comes at it, we try to direct capital to make sure that everybody has equal opportunities, right? So we have that means affordable housing, that means healthcare. And as we look at growth, we want to make sure that people are not left behind, that everybody kind of comes up together and that there's not gaps. Anytime you have large economic growth or large population growth, you're going to have distortions, right? So part of what we are hoping to do, and I really loud the optimism of the rest of the panel. I think Orlando has and Orange County has what it takes to really grapple with the challenges that this new growth is going to bring.
Perfect. I think Katie has our first question.
So, Cheryl, we're going to go to you first. Lucky you. How do you, like in your role and in Osceola County, how are you specifically tackling growth responsibly?
Sure. Well, part of what I mentioned earlier is that we've created what's called an urban growth boundary. So basically for the growth to occur within that area, and then outside of that is an ag and conservation, which is nearly 70% of our property right now. And when we're approving subdivisions now, we're looking at them in a different manner, making sure there's good connectivity of roads, because we don't always have that. And sometimes it's difficult because we have so many lakes and riverine system that you're confined. But by also creating centers within those communities and school sites and such, so you don't have as much of a commute anymore. So the less you can cut down on your commute, then the less congestion that we're going to have. So those are the type of things that we're looking at in Osceola County to help with that future growth that is coming here.
I have a viewer question, and also, Bree, I'm not sure if we're getting any, but let us know. And if you guys have any questions, please come up too, because we'll run out pretty quickly. But one of my viewer questions is for Jasmine. A viewer named David wants to know, why not just stop the growth until we can get a handle on things like water, roads, and affordable housing? So Jasmine, is stopping growth even an option for our area?
So as a native Floridian and Orlando resident, I'm probably one of 5 still here in the area. I would definitely say that it's not an option. I think, as it was shared earlier, Orlando is a desirable place to be. It is in the center of the state. We're literally 45 minutes in one direction from the beach, an hour from another beach. We have one of the happiest places on earth here in the center of the city. And so I don't think that it's an option for us to pause and close the doors to the city of Orlando. That's just not realistic. I think what was already suggested was, how do we work with our communities? How do we work with the natural resources we have? How do we work with our elected officials to build out a plan that allows us to meet the needs of the growth that we're getting ready to experience, and then also project what is to come for the city. I think that's probably one of the best ways to do that. Volunteering on some of the community boards that have already been talked about is another way to provide input. Electeds, leaders in organizations, coming together may sometimes be able to be the best way to solve some of the problems or issues that we may see as a crisis. But I think that that's one of the ways that we should approach the situation, but not closing it certainly isn't an option.
And Shara, I remember we did an interview and you said, we can't just put up a sign and says, sorry, Osceola County is full. I mean,
Yeah.
Sure, and we're a heavy private property rights state. If someone has a piece of land and it has a certain zoning, we can't just tell that individual they can't sell their property and do what they legally can do with it. But let's think about it for a minute. What if we did stop growth? Well, one, the funds that we receive for transportation, a lot of it comes from mobility fees or impact fees. And again, if that growth stops, that means that source of fund isn't coming in. The other thing it does, as a realtor, I get excited because then it forces property values up. But when you talk about affordable housing, now we've exacerbated the affordable housing situation. So again, it's that balance.
and I think we have an audience member question. Please introduce yourself and go ahead and ask a question.
Sally Baptist, excuse me, I know some of you know me, and I was born and raised here in Orlando. Let you guess how many decades that's been. My parents were both from Massachusetts. They came down here because there were no jobs up there, and this is when Disney was getting going, so they came down here. And just for the record, I am not against growth. I'm against reckless growth. We are suffering with reckless growth. We do not let growth pay for itself. I see that. Now, I know I'm supposed to be asking you some questions, but I've been studying this stuff for a long time. And I'm one of the people who are out here who are really fed up with what's going on. The growth is not being managed correctly, and we're not letting the growth pay for itself. So I can start out, and I'm going to have a whole lot of questions. So depending on how many other people, I'm going to get in as many as I can. But we have this thing called a comp plan. It means nothing, really. Because every time a developer comes up, they want to change it, all the waivers, 11 waivers on one request, one applicant. So, I mean, we have a comp plan, but it doesn't mean anything. The zoning, rezoning, how many of the meetings have you seen me at lately? The commission meetings going over the public hearings for all the changes. So so they don't really mean anything. They're going to, I know other people are going to be here, going to be talking about some of the stuff that's going on with the wetlands and stuff. But who should pay for growth? That's going to be one question. Because we keep giving all the breaks to the developers, giving them the waivers, the AMA, which is the alternative mobility area, et cetera, doing all this. And now Orange County wants to raise the sales tax because they want me to pay when they just gave $125 million to Universal, et cetera, et cetera. The growth is just out of control. Who should pay for growth?
So let's start by clearly mixing a whole host of issues in that some are related, some are not related. But with respect to our framework for growth, we are very fortunate. Florida was one of those few states back in the 80s that passed fairly substantial growth management legislation, put some provisions in place. And in Central Florida, I think we have some of the brightest minds and planners who have brought to bear a tremendous amount of talent. In Orange County, we are continuing to evolve in terms of how we approach growth. We now are working on our 2050 vision. We're looking at Orange Code, attempting to develop some different strategies that take into account this growing urban area. I too am a Orlando native, born here, perhaps even earlier than you, and I've seen what's happening in our community. With respect to Orange County, we know that we are not the same community that we were in when I was a young planner in the 80s. And we now have to take into account that we are an urban county. A good portion of our community certainly has developed in different ways to reflect where we're positioned as well. We had to reflect and understand and recognize the growth demands as well as growth plans in surrounding counties. We wanted to avoid sprawl, and so it meant opening up some opportunities in certain areas in Orange County. We are developing strategies to have more mixed-use development, to do all the things that you've heard at each of those meetings when we talk about how do we reduce trip length, how do we create patterns that we hope will put people a little closer to their residents, closer to places of business and jobs. Some of that, the job part certainly is a bit more challenging in terms of how they locate, but we can provide opportunities for more retail establishments and the little short trips that folks would do to hopefully put them in places that people can walk to or have alternatives to driving and bicycle and walk to those locations. It was mentioned, last thought, as was mentioned, we are a property rights state. We don't have that ability, nor do I think it's wise just to simply say, no, you cannot develop. If folks are doing it in our framework, if their future land use, if their use is consistent with the future land use, that's our ability to predict those growth needs.
Well, I got to have a couple of quick follow-ups
So
here.
you can come up. Can we give our second audience member a chance, and then you can come back up and bounce off a little bit?
Just to comment on what you were saying, following up.
Stefan Gillum, Legacy Ventures. So I wanted to ask the question, we spoke about people moving into Central Florida at a rapid rate because of the opportunities that are here, whether it's opportunities in work, opportunities in land or development or whatever that is. But with all of the opportunities that are here, what do you think, and whoever can pick it up that wants to, what do you think is the best way for us to prepare the citizens that are already here to take advantage of those same opportunities that people are driving into Central Florida to take advantage of?
Well, I think some of it, if I could say, is our perceived opportunities as well. Unfortunately, especially dealing with a lot of our folks in the affordable housing side, I've talked with folks who have moved in from other states believing there are great opportunities for them. While there are jobs, the jobs don't necessarily pay what's needed in order to meet the needs for their rent and all their other household expenses that they have. So yes, there's opportunities on one hand, but it really depends on where you're at in the spectrum of opportunities. We are very much so entrenched in tourism, as we know. I mean, it's our bread and butter. In Osceola County, I say we've got tourism on the west and we've got ag on the east. And unfortunately, a lot of those jobs don't pay a high wage. And so while there's opportunities, there's a gap or there's a disparity between the income that's being received and what the expenses are here. So it depends on what you're referring to specifically for when you say the opportunities. I mean, I know that Byron spoke about the fact that, I mean, you think about Florida. People want to come, Sunshine State, being in the center of Florida, people feel safer because of hurricanes and such. The fact that they can drive an hour and a half in either direction pretty much and hit water, I mean, it is a great location.
Now, as an ad there are entrepreneurial opportunities that come along with it. When I look at one of our panelists, part of that's finding those opportunities. Another possible opportunity that we hope that the voters may have a chance to consider associated with like sales tax. So if the transportation sales tax indeed goes on the ballot, is voted, that's approximately $600 million a year that's infused into our local economy. And so the question is, where might be those entrepreneurial opportunities that existing resident or new resident, but as an existing resident, since you mentioned that, could determine how can I participate in that opportunity that we are doing to address growth, and now a resident has a chance to participate in that solution.
And I'll add to that. I mean, having been in the corporate world for, I won't say how long, but then choosing entrepreneurship, you know, sometimes we just have to think differently about what work means, you know, and wherever we build and how we plan and develop, if we have opportunities within the community for people to expand their education and take advantage of programs like we have had an opportunity to do that help support entrepreneurship, support education, support development, so that people can look at work differently. There's a lot of companies now that offer opportunities for people to work at home. That is so important, and addresses, you know, the transportation issue. It addresses, you know, the environmental issues. But skills are needed, and there is a path where you can start, you know, in some of these companies. And I know there's a concern about, you know, which ones are legit or not. But there's resources out there that will help point you in the right direction. Freelance work. building skills and talents and having the education and the resources within your community to be able to grow and develop is a huge part, I think, of the growth initiative.
Well, there are some reputable places for sure that you can go to seek help. The University of Central Florida maintains a number. I gotta get a plug in. There you go. Nice. We've got Disney National Entrepreneur Center, Small Business Development Centers. We've got a network of incubators throughout the region. Orange County, the City of Orlando, the Orlando International Airport, the Convention Center. They have small business programs. So I don't know if you're a small business person. There's a lot of guidance opportunities that I hope people know about, because the growth that we're all discussing here today affords us the ability to make sure some of this gets spread around to us. And we already have 3 of the 5 original residents of Orlando have spoken. For us newbies, we need work too. And so you've got billions of dollars of these projects, and there's hundreds and hundreds of millions allocated for the small business folk in our region. So I mean.
Well, the UCF incubators
There's
around
a
it?
whole network.
Studio.
Starter Studio.
Yep.
Rally.
Yeah,
Rallies,
I'm sure I'm missing things. Lots of chambers of commerce as well. So I think if you reach out, that helps there, and because of the growth, the opportunity is as well.
Nadine, I believe you already have a question like this that you were prepared to ask, but we did get it from another viewer, so I
Perfect.
wanted to get it in. Frank just submitted this on clickorlando.com.
He asks, where do our panelists stand on diversifying the tourism development tax in Orange County for other projects besides tourism for growth? This is a big one from a lot of viewers. They want to know, why can't we use the tourism development tax dollars for problems with growth?
So I can certainly start with the why can't we use it under our current situation is because it's, again, the statutes don't provide for, or I should say it the other way, the statutes prescribe what the use, those uses, those allowable uses. And primarily they are to promote and encourage tourism and help that industry grow because of the spin-off effects on the rest of the economy. Obviously, there are some provisions that allow some communities to use a portion of TDT for some other purposes, provided certain thresholds are met. Right now, for us as a community, as a practical effect, our commitments that are being covered by the tourist development tax are, for the most part, consuming the majority of those dollars. And a lot of those commitments aren't just for our convention center, but when we look at the amenities that have been provided downtown in our community, regional amenities like the Dr. Phillips Center for the Performing Arts or Camping World Stadium. But beyond that, a lot of arts organizations, that a good portion of those dollars of the tourist development tax are made available to arts organizations as well. And so our community benefits in a number of different ways, and we have some substantial commitments. And that one source and that one source alone isn't sufficient to address all these needs. And if we pull from those, from the places they are going, we're simply creating a larger gap with respect to what we are doing in areas like arts and culture and continuing to provide those economic benefits associated with tourism.
If I could add, I think that this question is tied to the previous question we received about how to actually pay for growth in the state. And I just want to add that in 2010, Florida counted in their 2010 census, they undercounted. And the state of Florida lost $20 billion in federal funding. That's funding that actually could go towards the things that I think we're talking about here today, like healthcare, education, roadways, building brand new schools, housing. With $20 billion lost in federal funding, we have an opportunity again in the 2020 census to get it right. In Orange County alone, 200,000 people were omitted from actually filling out the census. We ranked #1 among 50 of the nation's largest urban counties in the nation. That's a problem. It's easy to do, it's free, it's simple, it's online this year. Get counted in the census. We have the ability to receive $44 billion in federal funding. imagine what $20 additional billion would have looked like over the course of the past 10 years when it comes to how we can pay for growth. We shouldn't allow that to happen again the next 10 years.
Can I just follow up to one
Go for
question?
it.
And then I'll sit down and I promise I won't get up unless no one's here. I'm sorry, I've studied this stuff too long. Okay, anyway, just for the record, I happen to be one of the working class here. I'm not a lobbyist, I'm not a developer, I don't have any other benefits, and I am lucky enough that I get to work from home, so I don't have to drive in that traffic in the morning anymore, which is really nice. But going back to something that was said earlier, talking about the plan and everything. Well, the fact is the planning isn't being done right. I can't tell you how many times I've heard engineers say they're going to mitigate the wetlands. Like they can simply pick up a wetland and throw it over here. Now we're having flooding because they haven't planned correctly. And yeah, we have rights of use of land, but you know what? Because they built this Walmart here, and I think someone else is going to talk a little bit more to this, now there's more flooding in this other area. You can't build on your land if you're going to flood the neighbor next to you just because you have rights to build there. You can't go and impact everybody else. So there's a lot of stuff that's not being paid attention to. It's very reckless. It really is. I'm sorry, it is.
You have a question, Sally?
So anyway, the other question, I don't think we totally answered, should growth pay for itself, which it should pay for itself. We shouldn't keep giving all the benefits. And the Sunrail's been a failure, transportation has been a failure. Why do we spend money on Sunrail when it doesn't work? And the information on the tourist development tax, that's a whole other story too that didn't really get fully answered here. I've done a lot of research on this stuff. So transportation, what are you really gonna do to fix transportation? How can you justify to keep approving the sprawl all over the place, changing the land use from rural agriculture to planned development? That's what I'm talking about, reckless growth, when you can't support the traffic and what you have today. When are we going to clean up the act?
May I?
Yes. So this sounds like every Tuesday we're going.
I will sit
Well,
down.
I think you're talking about land use plans that are made 50 years out into the future, and it's really hard to make predictions, especially about the future, isn't it? I think Yogi Berra said that. What's that?
The conservation area, like the split forts that they're going to.
Well, but you're talking about making changes here, changes there. But let me say, so revising these plans makes sense. What would not make sense is to say, oh, here's a plan we made in 1970 and we're sticking to it because that's the plan. I mean, that's not a way to manage a community. Now, you're talking about Sunrail's not working. These are pieces of a puzzle that have to be assembled that can address some of the same, yes. It's a transportation network. That's a part of a network. A network's not a piece. A network is a collection of connected pieces, a system. And that's what's being assembled. And I think it will alleviate some of these problems. Yeah, I think you can sprawl, look around the nation, at large metro areas and see how development has grown. Go to Washington, D.C., and go along the metro lines. What happens? Go along the rail line. No, we're not Washington, D.C. yet. But I wish we had a magic wand that we could wave and everything would be wonderful. But that's on the other side of town there, and you have to pay to get in there for that. But there's a lot of work. But anyway.
And Byron, I know that you're representing Orange County, and the mayor in Orange County is pushing for a 1-cent sales tax. We've done a lot of stories on this. I've even talked to the folks at FDOT, and unless there is a big pot of money federally, a lot of folks are banking. Lynx, Sunrail, they're banking on this 1-cent sales tax. Tell us, why do you think a tax is the way to go, a sales tax on folks, on residents, is the way to go to solve public transportation?
Sure. It starts with a vision for a community. Let's make certain that's where we start the conversation. It's not about pieces, it's not about one strategy, but it really is about what type of community we want to be, what do we envision ourselves, and then how do we get there? What are the components, the parts that are necessary to help us be that type of community that indeed continues to be attractive. That's the place where we want to live, we want to work, we want to raise our families. We talked about challenges that come along with that growth. Transportation is clearly one of those. And so Mayor Demings has advanced a proposal that attempts to meet so many of our needs, that links transportation with housing, but it really is about providing greater mobility, greater access to jobs, giving people, hopefully saving them time so they can spend more time with families. The Transportation Sales Tax Initiative is designed to reflect what we heard from the community. This effort started with a large grassroots effort. There have been more than 200 community engagement sessions. The mayor, our board, we listened to what we heard from those citizens. There were over 11,000 surveys that were completed, and people said that they are tired of the congestion. They want solutions. Now it's up to us to develop the plan that hopefully will address those concerns. They said they'd like to see a more robust mass transit system. One of those fallacies that folks tend to say is, or use oftentimes, is transit doesn't pay for itself. Well, let's talk about roads. Let's talk about the subsidies that are associated with roads. We understand that's part of infrastructure, but we don't complain about that because that's part of the infrastructure. We recognize that it's important to have infrastructure in place. Transit is part of that infrastructure as well. And so a plan has been developed based upon those comments from the community that will produce hopefully a very substantial change in our transit system, our roadway system, safety and maintenance and operation and maintenance. One aspect of the transit component is to completely flip the current level of service. Right now, less than 7%, about 5 routes of the 70 routes that Lynx runs operate at 15 minutes or less. More than half are an hour or more. This proposal will flip that, taking almost 50% of those routes going to 30 minutes or less, and a good portion, I think 24 or 25%, would actually go to 15 minutes or less. That's substantial. That addresses some of those concerns we saw in labor land that resulted in folks missing links, missing connectivity, and then having to spend 2 or 3 hours each way just trying to get to a job. The plan is designed to address those concerns, not from the transit standpoint, because a number of the folks in our community on the lower end of the wage scale rely on transit, and they could certainly benefit by enhancing that system, and maybe some who are riders of choice could benefit, and we will have a strong component for that's a lot to do in 2 minutes. That's not fair.
Just quick addition that I think is important for everybody to realize, and I've learned from Mayor Demings as he's gone around and done the 200 plus workshops, is that we are uniquely positioned with this transportation surtax to take advantage of the tourists who come here. In fact, over half of the generation of this tax will come from those who are coming to visit here in Orlando, and that's unlike most other communities who are looking to tax our residents in order to build out the infrastructure that's necessary to handle that type of growth. So I think that's really unique, and for me, shows that we have an opportunity to move this agenda forward for all.
And it's a consumption basis based on what you purchase. And most people don't realize for large purchases, it's only paid on the first $5,000. So anything over that, it's not paid on. We actually had someone come to our commission meeting and said she did a calculation. It's costing people, I think it was like $18 an hour or something. Over $2,000 a year is what she figured. Average for Osceola County, when we looked at our referendum, was about $150 a year per person. I would gladly pay that now.
Yeah, I just want to add in that the League of Women Voters 2 years ago did a transportation study in Central Florida, along with some of the people who formerly worked at the Orlando Sentinel. And what we discovered is, obviously, what people know, there's a lot of issues around transportation. One of the recommendations that we made was to add that surcharge or that sales tax, because it's really important for us to be able to build out our infrastructure. We're also a donor state, and we send a lot of our tax dollars back to the federal government, and they don't necessarily come back to us. We've turned down trains that we've approved and other things that could have improved our transportation. So voting is really important, and looking at what people are going to vote for in your, not only your local elections, but your state is really important.
I'll just add, based upon listening to the community developing the plans, the needs, as we looked at the needs that were identified, those needs total between $14 billion and $17 or $18 billion. Those are fairly substantial needs to improve the transportation of our community. The sales tax is a source that can address that type of need for our community and add tremendous benefit. The tourists pay 51% of it as well, so they also are contributing to it, and the overall economic impact on a particular person, which we will have that information. We'll be sharing that information. I don't want to give the big reveal just yet.
Oh, why not? Come on.
But
No one
we've
will
also
know.
certainly considered that.
All right, let's go.
Hey there, my name is Mike Yeba, and I'm a realtor who services Central Florida. So naturally, my question is going to be about inventory. With so many people moving to Central Florida, and especially with it being a seller's market right now, is there a discussion happening about how to keep up with the demand? And if there is a discussion, what are some of the solutions?
Are you talking about the affordable housing demand?
Just housing in general, because right now inventory is so low, and with floods of people moving to beautiful Central Florida, there's really nothing out there right now.
Come on down to Osceola County, we can help you out.
Osceola County sounds good.
So one of the things that I know our planning department led the charge on was enabling accessory dwelling units throughout the residential zoning districts, which is a huge strategy because what that does is it helps to densify within our neighborhoods, which supports our Main Street businesses, often small and mid-sized businesses. And it also addresses the affordable housing challenge as
Chris,
well.
can you explain what an accessory dwelling unit is?
Yes, accessory dwelling unit, also known as kind of these mother-in-law suites, so to speak, are kind of a home, a small kind of cottage home that you can build in your backyard or in part of your parcel that you own that can add revenue to the homeowner, but it can also enable more housing stock. And I think that's a really innovative way to approach it that we've been doing in the city of Orlando is, again, enabling that across all residential zoning districts.
And I'll just say the housing for all, the housing for all, the intent of the housing for all, we know we have some challenges, particularly at the lower end, but it was a recognition that the overall supply needs to increase in order to alleviate some of those concerns. And so the strategies that that committee, that task force created, really looked at every end of the spectrum. Certainly we want to, and I think they came with some fairly responsible recommendations to address the lower end of the spectrum, but they also recommended a number of other changes, regulatory changes, remove some of those barriers that would increase the overall supply of housing, we hope, over time.
I think the other thing on affordable housing is that there's single-family homes, right? Are they affordable? Right now, since the recession, the prices have come up, and they've come up much higher than wages in our area. So as a result, for home ownership, for a large portion of our population, affordability is inaccessible. A large part of affordability also has to do with rents, and the same is happening with the rental market. Apartments are very expensive relative to wages in the population. The National Low Income Housing Coalition just came up with its annual gap report, and it showed that Central Florida MSA, Orange County, Orlando, Kissimmee, is the sixth most inaccessible housing market for affordability, especially for very low income persons. So it's a challenge that we have today, and it has to do with the whole range of affordable housing solutions.
One thing that we often don't talk about in affordable housing is efficiency of our housing stock, which happens to be, when you talk about the expenses, one is the rent or the mortgage, the other is the cost of utilities and other expenses. And what we often are not doing is ensuring that affordability and sustainability are coming to a nexus. One thing we've done in the city of Orlando is we've now set certain criteria for when we're allocating SHIP, home, or CDBG dollars from our housing department. We're tying the improvements to energy efficiency standards, Energy Star appliances, and higher SEER air conditioning systems, so that when we do provide them to those who are in a certain situation, their utility bills aren't burdening them. They're not pushing them out of affordability, which is the second reason why most people are foreclosing these days.
I think your question was about production, right? Like, I think in 2018 there were about 16,000 single-family housing starts in our area. compare that to about 74,000 units in the gap for affordability for low-income people, right? So if every single unit that was produced for the next 2 years was affordable, which is an impossibility, we still would not catch up to where we need to catch up to. The challenge for affordable housing is significant, and it will take everybody around this panel and all of you to kind of help make it into that.
We could talk housing for days. Let's move
We
on to our
could,
next
we could.
question.
Actually, we can go back to public transportation.
Okay, let's do it.
Mike Burson, longtime Orlando resident. As you can see, I have no gray hair on my head. But yes, anybody who will answer. So I recently went a few weeks without a car because, well, transmission gave out, so I was borrowing my grandpa's. And as established, Sunrail's a mess, and you need a car to get anywhere around this city. Now, I just saw a story, won't say which station because obviously we're here at Channel 6, but regarding Sunrail's expansion, they said that if they don't expand to the land as planned, that frees up $20 million or $1 billion. I can't say which.
34 million.
Thank you. For improvements. Now, should this sales tax should this sales tax be voted in? Will it be possible for the expansion and for the improvements? And if not, this is the controversial question. Will execs be put into the position where they'll have to either put up or shut up, which means take any pay cut necessary for the greater good of Sunrail?
Okay. So let's talk about the Sunrail system and the sales tax. Currently, on Sunrail operates, it's a commuter system, which means it runs during the weekday for the most part, primarily during the morning commute and then the afternoon commute, and there's a midday as well. Under the proposal, which is a sales tax that would be enacted in Orange County, so the dollars can only be used in Orange County, cannot be used to extend service in Volusia County for that part of your example. But within Orange County, the dollars could be used, and certainly in the proposal would be to enhance service, to go to weekends, to increase headway frequency during the weekday, extend some service hours as well so they can run later. Also to make additional connections so that there's a connection to the airport, to Orlando International Airport, to International Drive area. So that's what the proposal that Orange County is considering would enhance Sunrail, again, 7 days a week service, more frequent service, and some additional routes. That would tie in, again, and Sunrail is kind of a backbone, a north-south component of it, but there are other components of the proposal that looks at what we call high-capacity corridors, bus rapid transit. I'm trying not to use some acronyms, but we can look at some other services that could also complement and reach other areas east-west as well.
And that last leg is actually up to Volusia.
Well, I think we have about 15 minutes, so we're trying to get to as many questions as possible. I think we're going to go to clickorlando.com.
We have a question that came in about housing. I know you guys wanted to move off that topic, but we touched on this a little bit. You said there were several challenges when it comes to affordable housing, but we didn't get to talk solutions. This question is, when it comes to affordable housing, what is the absolute #1 thing that needs to happen to make it possible? I know you already said there were several things that need to happen, so I guess what's the most important thing that should be considered?
That's a tough.
Ignacio, do you want to take
Dollars.
that on?
I mean, it's
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, policy-wise, I'll let the government folks answer that, but I mean, this is a question of supply and demand. We're talking about growth and the strong growth in the region. That is fueling the demand for housing. Mortgage rates are super low now. Demand continues to grow. So, most problems economic can be boiled down to that of supply and demand. So what needs to happen? Well, if you remember Econ 101, there needs to be an increase in supply. And that means build. And the question is, will the construction be affordable or not? But I mean, increased supply, it's going to put some downward pressure on prices that continue to get pushed up. Then you build in this transportation network, and suddenly you can go, to 10 miles from a Sunrail stop in an area that's currently not developed. And it's going to be more likely you're going to build affordable housing there than you are in the heart of the city of Orlando. And so again, all this comes together, but we need to build more. And I think every time I speak to a builders group, I blame them for the housing shortage, and I say, you need to work harder. But remember where we came from. This last recession, the Great Recession, at its heart was a housing bubble. And so when the recovery started, historically, builders usually build at the beginning of a recovery. This time, understandably, they were a little bit hesitant to do so, and so I think that's how we got in such a bind.
I'll take a stab at this from the perspective of an organization that lends. So our role is to provide capital, a lot of it for affordable housing. And my answer might be somewhat surprising. We need money, right? We need the right incentives to increase. So that's one, right? Developers needs to be incentivized the right way, not over-incentivized. Producing affordable housing is a very lucrative business for some people. So let's make sure that the incentives are right. We need the right zoning, we need the right size, we need density. From the side that I look at it, which is how are low-income people going to be affected? The thing that I think we need the most, above all those other things, which are essential and important, is to have a strong system of affordable housing delivery, right? That is the nonprofit sector, that is producing affordable housing for a mission, not for increasing profits. We have some really good nonprofit affordable housing providers in Florida and in our area, but they need to be even stronger, right? And we need to think about how we make them stronger to go forward. So Habitat is here, Ability Housing is here, incredibly strong groups. We need to really focus on how to make those organizations even more powerful and be able to do a lot more.
And something we just reported on this week, for the first time in 13 years, the state legislature has finally agreed to fully fund that Sadowski Housing Fund. And this was a fund that
Signed yet.
hasn't signed yet. No, you're right. That's true. I know, you're right. The budget still has to be signed. We got until Friday, but this was the first time they've agreed on this. And I know that's a big win for the counties and a lot of the nonprofits, because that's a huge pot of money that could go specifically for low-income families.
Sure, I mean, that is great news, and we hope that the signing does occur. But some of the other things we talk about, incentives, in Osceola County, we created $1 million fund to help with the impact fees, the impact fees that we have for the developers. And by the way, we do charge 100% impact fees. It's a state statutory formula. And you can only charge for the impact that they create, and you have to have a formula and everything and be able to prove it and have it where it would stand up in court. And we charge 100%. Some only charge 80%, we charge 100%. If previously developers got a better credit, now they're paying full freight on the credit. So we have turned that around. So in Osceola County, that's one of the things that we're doing. The county also recently bought 82 acres at the Point Siena Sunrail stop, understanding that transportation and housing is so important. And a portion of that will be set aside for affordable housing. We'll do a request for proposals and come on down, because we want to see a great project there. We want those densities, as you talked about, because those are much so needed. In the last 2 years, and by the end of this year, we'll have 600 units that we've put out in Osceola County specifically for affordable housing, but it's still not enough.
I would say too, there's just as an add to that, there are a lot of community leaders spurring out of the action team that Mayor Demings put together that are working on different solutions, including Regional Housing Trust, refurbishing houses in the Paramore area. Bright Community Trust has come into the area. They're one of the top community trusts to be able to help rehab some houses that are rental properties in order to keep the rents low for residents, and also with OUC's help, keeping them
energy
more
efficient.
Energy efficient.
And water efficient.
And so they're looking at a build of 25,000 affordable units within the next 10 years, looking at different types of capital stacks, bringing banks to the table, using some debt capital, using some philanthropy and other forms of capital in order to be able to move housing forward in a way where we're not fully reliant on the government.
And Sandy briefly touched on an issue that I feel like Minetta could really weigh in on when it comes to the fear of gentrification in some of these neighborhoods. And you are in Paramore, a lot of development happening there. What have you seen in your eyes? And we'll get to your questions, so thank you guys for being patient. I wanted to include you. What are you seeing in your eyes, and what are the fears of some of the folks in Paramore?
Great question. Obviously, being a business owner, one of the things that we try to do is talk to our customers, hear what their concerns are, and support it in whatever way we can. But a lot of the fears are not sustaining the culture, the history of the community, people not having jobs and opportunities and education within the community that will allow them to work, play, and learn within the community. And that's why that's so important to be a part of the planning process. Also have places where they can shop and enjoy, walking down the street with their family and in a safe environment is also important. So those are all, I believe, parts of the plans, but I think this is important to include those residents in those discussions more and in a way that it's accessible to them, where those discussions happening in that community so that they can have an input in those discussions and planning.
And I think for this, there's actually a liaison in the community that's speaking with the residents. The residents who've had their homes refurbished seem to be very happy with it. They're all renters, and part of the incentive is for the builders is to keep the residents in their homes. One of the questions that we ask is whether or not the original resident is still in the home. And so it's very important to us to, from the Central Florida Foundation and the Community Housing Trust, to really look at preserving the neighborhood and the integrity of the neighborhood as much as possible.
Preserving the integrity of the neighborhood and the community, and also talking to residents, we also should make sure that as buildings go up, the folks who live in those communities can also be employed in some of those buildings that are coming down there. They should not only be employed in low-wage positions, or hourly positions, but also in some of the executive roles that are also available to folks down there. So as we are having conversations about what it looks like to sustain history over a long period of time, being able to actually afford to live there and partake in some of the things that are there contribute to whether or not they can stay there and help preserve that history.
All right, let's turn it back to the audience. Introduce yourself.
Yes, my name's Aaron Powell. I'm with the Orlando Bike Coalition, and we're advocating for protected and separated biking infrastructure in the region. Back to transportation. Obviously, the automobile is probably the least efficient way to move people. And I think that with this increase in population, we've got to be talking about moving people and not just, building roads. So I guess I know that the city, Chris, has been doing a lot of things, especially since Billy Hadaway came on board with transportation, to actually bring real infrastructure for cyclists that are off the road, protected and separated. We have the Orlando Bicycle Beltway that's coming. That's an 8.5-mile loop that will create this connectivity. If people are going to cycle, they have to feel safe and they have to feel comfortable. So I guess my question would be anything that you might want to expand on what the city's looking at. We're very excited about things that are coming. I just saw something on potentially for Pine Street that would actually protect cyclists, creating some kind of buffer there from automobiles. I don't know if our panelists from Orange County and Osceola might speak to what you all are doing to create this safe and separated infrastructure for people who want to ride a bike.
Thank you for your question. I think it's critically important when we start talking about also the environmental impacts of transportation that alternative sources like obviously bicycling are critical to solving that and addressing the climate crisis. We are fortunate to have Billy Hadaway, who many coin as the godfather of complete streets, and really helped to develop a strategy for the state of Florida as it relates to complete streets. And I'll tell you that in our conversations, he's first and foremost always looking at ways in which we can make our roadways friendly for pedestrians and bicyclists first and foremost. You mentioned the 8.5-mile bicycle beltway. We're very excited about that. That will be fully protected across the entire 8.5 miles and really provide a very seamless experience for bicyclists around our downtown core. And we're also beginning to look at other roadways that we can expand, Robinson, Pine, Corrine, and others, where we realize the demand is there for bicycling. We've seen an increase in ridership, especially as the Lime bikes have come on board and other bike share, Hopper and others have come on board. We're seeing really an increase even in those who are using the electric scooters as well, pretty significant numbers, over 50,000 rides in the first month alone. So we want to encourage that type of activity, but you're absolutely right. We are certainly one of those communities that is dangerous to use alternative forms of transportation, and I'll tell you that we are actively trying to address it every single day.
Osceola County also has a complete streets, and matter of fact, we spoke about it at Metro Plan this morning, the new plan to come out. And for all new, all new developments that we have, we require within those complete streets to have either a multimodal path, which is the preferred alternative, but we look at dark sky lighting, we look at all these other different things as well. We have a bicycle pedestrian master plan, which will connect up with the Orange Trail, and so we've been actively working on that. Shingle Creek is probably our most significant one, just received some additional funding for that. That's how it will connect up through Orange County.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, it's on John Young and not behind the subdivision, but the individuals that live there didn't realize the true benefits that they would have had they agreed to allow it to go behind, because that would have been a much nicer ride and a much safer ride. But we're certainly doing our part in Osceola County, because I love to bicycle.
Well, it looks like we have time for about the last 2 questions, so thank you so much. Do you want to go ahead?
Oh. Yep. Good evening. My name is Norma Linden. I've been living here 28 years, and I live on the east side on Econ Trail, and right across from me is a wonderful Orange County Fire Department. They've been there maybe 10, 11 years, and I welcome them with open arms. It's wonderful to have them. Because I've seen the growth there, I am an RCE, have just over an acre of land, and I see the growth. That area, that road cannot be expanded from Lake Underhill up to probably Deerwood. Transportation has already said it's just no way, because there are canals there. It's a 2-lane road, but there's subdivisions down the way closer to Cary Ford. The traffic is horrendous, and my question is, what are you doing? What are you going to do to ensure that these emergency vehicles are getting to the place not in 15 minutes, but quicker? I have seen myself coming down from Lake Underhill to my house, which is about a quarter mile, and then I see the trucks coming on the left lane towards me with other cars, and we all have to go into maybe the canals. One day, there's going to be accidents there. I mean, this is frightening, what's happening. Not only that, when they get to Lake Underhill, they cannot make a right to go towards Dean Road, because that is packed, and that's happening in the morning and in the evening, in the afternoons from 3:30 because of Deerwood Elementary School. So I just want to know, what are you doing? Because they are building and building, but the roads cannot be expanded. So why is that being allowed? Thank you.
Thank you. Clearly, we know that certain roads are constrained for several reasons. And so our approach is more about the network. How do we create more capacity in the network? And we look at certain areas. There is an East Orange study, as you may know as well, in which we are looking at a much broader area to determine where it is viable to add capacity, so that we can accommodate the traffic in that area, the traffic counts. Clearly, one of the ancillary benefits of addressing our transportation needs is to improve public safety. Our rescue vehicles, our engines, our fire apparatus, they're in the same traffic, they're in the same streets. We have a tremendous amount of pride. We have an ISO 1 for a county, which is fairly unusual, and that's based upon hitting certain standards, certain metrics. We certainly want to maintain that. And so we have to have the ability to be sure that we can respond. We appreciate, it's been a lost cause, and there used to be a time when folks would see or hear the sirens and they would move over, and it seems like increasingly people are not doing that, and so we certainly appreciate the courtesy that is extended to help some others. But to answer to your question, it is looking at that larger the regional network, and that's why we're doing an East Orange study that's looking at a much broader sector of the county.
Thank you.
All right, this is going to be our last question.
Hi.
Hi.
So my name is Derek Orberg. I am from Volusia County. I travel from there to a community that I manage on 436, and the traffic is a challenge, obviously. I'm here in several facets. I happen to be on the Volusia County Soil and Water Conservation District as an associate, and I manage a community like I just mentioned. I like the work that we're doing with fleet farming. I really appreciate that, and I would like to talk to you afterwards.
Okay.
So I do have a question prepared. I have three, but I know that our time is restricted. And again, I'd like to say thank you for Boomtown being here, and I would encourage that we continue to do this, because this is how we get to the answers. So I have a very directed question. I'm not sure who can answer this. A city official in Deltona stated publicly that the state of Florida is requiring every county and city to build their fair share of housing for 1,000 people per day moving into our state. There's no such requirement in our state constitution. Are you aware of such a statute?
I'm not.
I'm not.
Okay.
Next question.
So we are out of water, or at best insufficient supplies of clean drinking water, and yet water management districts are increasing the cup limits for municipalities. Shouldn't growth be controlled by the carrying capacity of our precious resources?
The answer is yes. And I will say that actually our Orlando Utilities Commission and the city were in the process of going through our CUP process. And there is downward pressure from the water management districts to do more about conservation. Water and the availability of fresh drinking water is one of the biggest threats facing the state when you look long term. Especially those in South Florida, as you start seeing sea level rise happening more and more. That's creating challenges with drinking water supply as that seawater merges with fresh water to create brackish water. And as a result, we could see a big migration of people, Orlando and Central Florida being one of those hotspots in the country for environmental migrants. I will say that in the city of Orlando, through Mayor Dyer's Greenworks Orlando initiative, we've really focused on working with our residents to change their lawns to be focused on Florida-friendly landscape. We actually have it within the code upon new construction. And also a number of rebates and incentives for us to really start putting downward pressure on outdoor irrigation. Outdoor irrigation is over 60% of potable water use in the city of in Orlando general. And we realized that that's to keep lawns green. So part of the fleet farming solution was to at least activate them and make them edible and turn those into little micro farms. Right. But in addition, there are other things that we can do to minimize on the water consumption and start to really put downward pressure on the use of that natural resource.
One of the things that Osceola is doing, just to add to that, we have a 150-acre pond that's next to Neo City, which is one of our other economic engines that we're working on. But it will divert water into the pond, help clean it, and then go into Lake Toho. But that water will also be used for reuse.
Mm-hmm. So. Reclaimed water is a major strategy that we're beginning to implement. That's the water that gets cleaned through our wastewater treatment process, and after it's fully purified, it's actually able to be used for irrigation. So you might see purple pipe around the city. Well, when you see a purple pipe, that's reclaimed water. That's water that's not being taken out of the Floridan aquifer, but that's being reused as part of our process. And so we want to encourage more of that. In fact, every new development is required to have reclaimed water, and OUC really does a good job at partnering with our water reclamation division to make those linkages. And I think we need to do more of that. We've got to get back into the traditional city, and that's going to be more expensive, of course, to bring in that water and those pipings into there, but it may be needed when you start to look long term and manage the growth that we're seeing in Central Florida.
And
So for the
Most of entities
legislators
working
that are
together
here,
on alternative water supplies as well, so that it's less dependence on the groundwater, but looking at those surface water opportunities, and collectively, that's certainly high on our priority list.
so for the legislators here, I would like to encourage you to allow the legislation that's needed to have fleet farming expand into different areas, maybe under different names, whatever, because they can only do so much effectively. But we have Charlie Pioli of Boomtown Compost that works with you, I believe.
Sure.
And I'd like to, and we're going to participate at our association because as I mentioned, the Management Association, we're looking to be more green. So I'd like to invite you to come speak at our association in Winter Park, so that we can maybe see if we have a partnership. So I would like to thank all the panelists here this evening. Again, thank you for News Channel 6. Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. And thank you for all the people who are behind the scenes putting on this event. I, again, encourage this to happen again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we do appreciate you guys taking the time, precious time, to have this very important discussion from affordable housing to fleet farming. We talked about a lot of different topics. So thank you guys to our 8 panelists. We appreciate your expertise. To our audience, we appreciate your passion. As we've heard, this is a complicated issue, and it is not a one solution issue as well. And absolutely, this is not a discussion that we are going to end here at News 6 tonight. Our Boomtown initiative will continue. I know my co-host, Katie Johnson, will continue their coverage as well at Boomtown. And we appreciate you guys for watching right here on clickorlando.com. We'll hope to see you soon.